Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Global Digital Asset Regulatory Summit. We are diving into the US this morning, first up, before we go across the globe to discuss the various jurisdictions, what's working and what's not working, and lessons that we can learn all the way here down under in Australia. My name is Amy Rose. I'm the Managing Director at the Digital Economy Council of Australia. And our next session is a panel where we are going to have a conversation with industry leaders. This conversation is led by Amanda Wick, who is the CEO and founder, I believe, of the Women in Crypto Association. And Amanda's also a former federal prosecutor and just honestly a champion of women. I went to the Women in Crypto website and there is a lot of speakers there. So thanks to Amanda for putting that list together, because some of the women you'll see on stage is thanks to the efforts of the Women in Crypto Association. So I'm going to bring our speakers on stage. Amanda and Steve Vallas, Katie Mitchell, Ayana Murphy, Lana Schwartzman will join us now. So just give us a small moment where I will bring them all on stage. Here we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Amanda Wick. I'm the founder and CEO of the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency and a principal with Insight Consulting. I'm really excited to be joined by four amazing speakers for today on the US regulatory environment and how it's impacting the digital asset industry. And I'll just let the speakers go around real quickly. Even though we have 30 minutes, we'll do lightning round introductions and keep it really short. And I'll go directly below me. Katie, go first.
Hi, everyone. Katie Mitchell with Coinbase. I am based in Singapore. I look after this region within our international policy team, and I am American, but work closely with our colleagues in the United States. So happy to share some perspectives on the ever-moving and ever-evolving world of crypto policy in the States.
That was perfect. Lana, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Lana Schwartzman. I'm head of regulatory and compliance at Nota Bene. Nota Bene is one of the leading crypto pre-transaction risk companies specializing in travel rule compliance that allows companies to stop potential illicit activity before they settle on the blockchain. Prior to this role, I've been the chief compliance officer for two different crypto companies, and I've been 18 years in compliance, and 13 of it has been in crypto compliance. Looking forward to our conversation.
Ayana?
Hi, my name is Ayana Murphy. I am Director of Global Advisory at Refine Intelligence, which is a fintech specializing in compliance. I've been in compliance for a very long time, financial compliance, and I'm really happy to be here.
And somebody who probably doesn't need any introduction in Australia, but Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Amanda. Steve Vallas, the Managing Director of Blockchain APAC. I make it my business to talk to people about this subject matter all day, every day, all across the region and the world.
Well, and that's probably because the US doesn't sleep, and we have been doing nothing but regulating and creating laws and creating issues, and we have plenty to talk about. So let's just jump right in and talk about the impact of US regulation on innovation. How do you guys see the current US regulatory environment impacting innovation in the digital asset industry? And I'll throw it out there for anyone who wants to dive right in. Or I'll pick on somebody.
No, I'll dive in. I'll dive in. I mean, I think two things can be true at the same time. One, I think folks who are motivated to kind of build in this space and to innovate will continue to do so, absent what's happening in capitals across the world. But I do think that because of how public a lot of the, for instance, SEC enforcement actions are, and how kind of ominous and scary a large regulator in the US is in terms of taking legal action against industry might be, it could potentially dissuade new upstarts from building within the United States. So there is a potential cooling effect there. Another thing, and I was just meeting with a number of congressional staff who are traveling throughout the region. And one thing that we see is just such a stark contrast between how firms are kind of courted and spoken to and invited into markets in certain parts of the world, including Asia Pacific, but also the Middle East, and the desire to have a very open and constructive conversation around principles of regulation. That's contrasted to some extent with what's happening in the United States. And similarly, there might be firms that want to enter the U.S. or partner with U.S. companies, but have a bit of a apprehension because of the environment there. So I think the headline is potentially ominous. There's also a lot of good work and good building in the policymaking arena, though. So I think it's good to give credit where it's due. I think lawmakers have continued to educate themselves on our industry and on technology, and there are some extremely crypto literate enthusiasts on both sides of the aisle in Congress, and there's been a lot of momentum on good pieces of legislation. So could seem like it's doom and gloom, but builders continue to build, as our industry likes to say, and that's true of legislators as well.
I will say, I think it was Electric Capital did a study on companies that had moved abroad due to the lack of clarity, regulatory clarity in the US. And so I think one of the struggles that we have, and Lana or Ayana, I'll let you jump in, is that it's frustrating because we're trying to tell policymakers, like, other jurisdictions are recognizing that this is just the future of digital finance. Banks had scams, GPR cards had scams, Green Dot had scams. You don't shut down an entire industry because some bad actors are using the technology in a bad way. I feel like in the US, it's been hard to struggle, like, to get over that narrative with some older states people, and with representatives who are kind of really focusing on the negative and aren't, to your point, Katie, looking at the jurisdictions that are saying, hey, we see the competitive value of attracting this business, and you don't necessarily have to build in the US to be successful, and actively luring that business to other countries, I think, is an issue. So I do think the lack of regulatory clarity that we have in the US is having a impact on the building. Do you think there are any areas where we need like clarity the fastest, or where do you think there are areas where in the US we're kind of like lacking regulatory clarity?
I can quickly jump on that, Amanda. At this point, so to answer you in one sentence, where do we need more clarity on sooner rather than later? I would say stablecoin at this point. Stablecoins, you see other jurisdictions providing a lot of clarity on that, and therefore attracting big companies. You probably have heard and read about Circle in EU making strides with their European stablecoin. But it makes me so angry at this point, right? As somebody like me, I've been crypto compliance of 13 years, right? I've been around the block, got many gray hairs to prove it as a CCO, and I'm just so angry at this point. Like, aren't we all sick of saying we need regulatory clarity at this point? Like, wouldn't somebody at some point get the message? And if not from hearing it from us, look what's happening abroad globally, right? So I'm a little bit angry at it. And the not like moving away from this narrative that crypto is bad. I mean, I'm so tired of all the different studies from all of the different blockchain analytics companies saying these things. And if I see one more consent order of a bank, I forget which was the latest one that came out, because I obviously follow crypto more than banks. I don't know if it was TD or HSBC or Wells. Forgive me, I don't remember which one. But it was one of the ones, and like when you went through it, it was like they don't have an appropriate chief compliance officer in place. They don't have appropriate transaction monitoring in place. Like the basic principles, like the pillars of AML and compliance. And this is from like big major banks. Are you kidding me? And instead you guys are saying how bad crypto is. We need to move away from that. We need to really, really turn the leaf here, or businesses are moving abroad.
I think, it's funny that you said the stablecoin thing, because one of the things that's really frustrating to a number of us in the United States is that if you look at what's happening geopolitically right now with dollar demand and dollar dominance, right now there's so much dollar demand in foreign countries, and it's through dollar-backed stable coins. It's at the retail level, it's not at the state level. And the surest way to stay, I want to tell Congress people, if you like being relevant and if you like spreading democracy, unless you intend to nuke your way around the world, weaponization of the US dollar is our tool. So you should create a path to stable coins, which is what's driving dollar demand abroad. It's like, it seems like it would be so obvious, and it's a national security issue. And it is, to me, probably one of the more frustrating things. I will say we've had a lot of big events happening in the US, or kind of like things on the radar. I think maybe not like a giant event. I think the lawyers will kind of nerd out for a second. Ayanna, if you want to just take a second and talk about Chevron for all the non-Americans out there. It was a big Supreme Court case precedent that was overturned. And we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but Ayanna's going to give you like the highlights reel and what you need to know.
So you're just asking a former lawyer to make something concise and short. Okay, sure, I'll do my best. But there was a big law that the Supreme Court case in the 80s called, for shorthand, we call it Chevron. And essentially, in certain circumstances, when the law was unclear, a little bit ambiguous, what would happen is if there was a court case, there would be deference to the agency that the agency's interpretation of what the statute or the law was. The courts would give that deference. And so that doctrine is called the Chevron doctrine or Chevron deference. And that might be relevant for us in things like, SEC opinions, FinCEN, Treasury, all of these regulatory bodies that regulate finance and it's related to all the related tools, including crypto. But really recently, I would say, I think it was the past month, but it's summertime, so it could have been a month and a half. They overturned this, which means that the agency's interpretations of ambiguous laws will not be given that deference, and the courts will then have to just decide independently of what the agency's interpretation is. Maybe they will agree with the agency, maybe they won't, but that deference is no longer the law of the land. And so in the US, everyone is wondering what the impact is going to be, because there are many, many, many laws where we use the interpretation of the agency, and especially in something like crypto. So it'll be really interesting to see the impact of that in the next 18 months, I'd say. Probably Lana and Katie have some thoughts on that too, how the impact of Chevron and the different agency opinions.
Well, I imagine it's super relevant in terms of people looking at the SEC, because that's probably the agency that more industry members have fought against legally, to say that their interpretation is unfair or that they're not following their statutory mandate. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong for the people who are active lawyers and not recovering lawyers, but I think the question is it going to impact essentially where the agency no longer gets deference? And a lot of people feel they are really taking some actions that aren't justifiable, especially, we don't have time to delve into it, but I think it was yesterday or the 28th maybe that they issued a Wells notice, which is basically a notification saying they're going to do an enforcement action on OpenSea, which, declaring that NFTs were securities, and does that mean all collectibles? And people were saying, well, now you'll have to sue Disney and Amazon, and where is this going to go? So it is a can of worms that they've opened, and now they don't have the legal case that gave them the deference that they used to. So I got the impression that a lot of people are hoping that Chevron being overturned basically kind of curbs some of the run amuckness of the SEC, was the impression that I got.
Amanda, interesting from my perspective, sort of looking at the way the US is viewed. I think most people keep talking about, the sleeping giant being awoken. It doesn't need to wake up. The US just needs to stir. If the US stirs, its outsized impact on all markets means that it will lead the way whether people like it or not. And that's one of the challenges from outside. As much as we chat about the influence we might have in other jurisdictions, if the US shows interest, there is interest. And on a couple of the points that you've already raised, Tether as a very good example. It's 120 billion-ish in terms of value at the moment. It does daily flows in excess of $40 billion. It holds more treasuries than most countries in the world. I think it's top 10 by treasury, and it netted something in the vicinity of $10 billion in profit by holding those treasuries in the last year. That's economic incentives at play. And I think the US market, more than any other, recognizes that those economic incentives are where they are orienting towards. The flip side to that is ETFs, and the fact that ETFs weren't going to happen until the hand of the SEC was forced in the way they've characterized it. And they were forced to roll over ultimately on ETFs being allowed. And then you see enormous inflows, I think at the fastest clip of any ETFs as a category in history. Economic incentives at play. So notwithstanding the fact we talk about regulation and clarity, economic incentives won't wait in some respects. So if there's an economic incentive, it tends to sort of lead the way. And that's the fascinating thing as an external party to observe about the way the US orients. They don't just wait for the regulation.
Well, and it's interesting that you said that, like, we don't need to move, we just need to stir, because I know Katie and I have been monitoring what's happening in the elections, like, really, really closely. And obviously, we're about to go through a presidential election in November, and also, you know, a congressional election, obviously. And it's funny because, Katie, I'm sure you've noticed this, but the amount of tea leaf reading that people are doing, like, at the individual speech, individual statements. I mean, people, to your point, not even watching a stir, like watching a finger flick and reading into that, right? I mean, it is crazy how much the United States is influenced, and where, you know, Chuck Schumer says something, one representative says something. But I think a lot of people are looking at the election, and Katie, Lana, I don't know if you guys want to touch on, but there's clearly a lot going on there. And what's some of the stuff that you're seeing in terms of digital assets?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. Obviously, we have some really kind of interesting developments with a major kind of party candidate leaning into crypto and specifically Bitcoin as much as former President Trump has. I think in the collectible cards that he just announced, there's one of him holding Bitcoin. I have not myself looked too closely at what those entail, but you have quite a lot of enthusiasm from that ticket. JD Vance, very familiar with crypto and disclosure requirements that Congress has to partake in on holdings, shows that he actually holds more crypto than kind of traditional stocks. So that's quite the echo. That's quite unique in this cycle. At the same time, we continue to contend that crypto is bipartisan. It's become a political issue, but it remains a bipartisan issue. It's purple, as a lot of folks in industry have said. And so there are a number of members of Congress who, sorry, I don't know why I'm echoing. Do you guys hear that? Maybe if we all mute. Okay, yeah. So there are a number of members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, like we said earlier, who are kind of crypto forward, and in fact, I think generational lines are the biggest kind of indicator of whether you understand and are either kind of pro or anti-crypto in Congress, which is very interesting. And in fact, bipartisan pieces of legislation that have either been passed or tabled within committee have been bipartisan as well. And so when it comes to the election, the analysis that we've done, and that Stand with Crypto, which is a fantastic kind of grassroots effort in the United States, has shown is that also holders and users of crypto in the US are also committed across party lines. And so I think it's important to keep it a political issue, but to maintain the bipartisan nature, because that, I think, speaks to longevity of industry, that you have kind of champions and understanding of the benefits of upgrading the US financial system, of upgrading the US technological system on the basis of this technology, of increasing kind of professional resilience, by future-proofing our workforce. I mean, there are a number of attributes as to why both Republicans and Democrats and independents should care about crypto and its success. And so what I would hope to see is that it's not necessarily a partisan talking point, but something that both perceive as kind of politically advantageous to have a constructive stance on. And then I guess the last thing on kind of tea leaves, and it is quite interesting because I think that there, obviously with politics, there's a transactional element. There are, really robust political action committees in the technology space this cycle. And so I think having a bit of staying power when it comes to how we perceive different potential administrations' views of our industry is really important beyond kind of that transactional moment in political cycles, which elections tend to be as well. And I think both camps candidly have had kind of some optimistic positions when it comes to embracing emerging technology broadly. So remains to be seen whether or not the Harris-Walz campaign says anything more concrete. But I think it's in some ways unique that we've had that level of concrete and transparent embrace by the former president at this point in the cycle.
Well, I think it's a tricky thing, right? Because, and I know we were talking about this earlier, but I think it's a tricky thing because you have one candidate who was, the president 4 years ago, and while he was president, actually was really anti-crypto. And then 4 years of Dems who continued, if not enhanced, that war on crypto, right? So now you've had 4 years where most of the populace in the United States has only seen the Dems taking really, really aggressive actions against the industry. And now when Trump turns around and says, oh, now I'm for crypto and now I'm doing this and I'm going to fire, against them on day one, and saying a lot of stuff that's either like impractical or actually not able to be done, but he's saying much, much better things, and it's falling on very receptive ears because people have literally just spent 4 years watching things like Operation Choke Point, which, killed some businesses' abilities to operate in the US. And Ayana or Lana, or if anyone, I don't know, I think one of you was going to talk briefly about Choke Point. But it's a very big problem. And I don't know if any of you want to touch on it, but I don't think it's just in the US either. Steve, I think you were saying earlier that Choke Point had also something similar had happened in Australia.
It's not just Australia. It's every jurisdiction I speak to. Everyone says the provision of reliable banking services is a privilege if they can kind of find them, get them, and hold on to them. So it's a consistent message. But I think it's led by a lot of the conversations that come out of the US, Amanda. And then a couple of other observations just about the way that political stuff is playing out and the impact it potentially has. I think people fail to appreciate how quickly the US can move with things like SAB 121. Chuck Schumer, as recently as last week at an event that you were involved in as well, saying it's not the end of the term. We might get something through before the end of the year. That's unusual for a lot of democracies. They're saying, listen, if there's a motivation to do it, we can get it done. And I think that's not appreciated outside. And so we do notice what Donald Trump says and what RFK had said, and the absence of conversation in some respects on the Democratic side. But below that waterline, Chuck Schumer, Senator Lummis, the way that Hester Peirce sort of characterizes this thing as well from the SEC perspective, Patrick McHenry, all these people have been speaking about this in volume over recent months and in recent years for some of them. And that's just not appreciated because people see the headline. And the headline says Trump speech, Donald Trump, Bitcoin on the balance sheet. They don't see how much has been happening below the waterline.
And I guess one thing that would be, interesting to consider too, is that I think what this cycle and potentially future cycles will prove is that, there is a voting bloc associated with crypto, and that might extend beyond the US. I think the US could be a really interesting proof point of that. In some data, we see that 1 in 5 Americans own crypto. It's more Americans than own an electric vehicle, yeah, that's a really important issue that's being discussed as well. More Americans than are members of trade unions, but of course, those are really important constituents that both parties vie for. We've seen, video clips of a number of candidates at various trade unions. That's always a really popular stop when you're campaigning. So I don't think it's unlikely that we, in future elections, won't see kind of the courtship of the crypto vote in a similar way. We're seeing themes and strands of it, but it's not as kind of universally at the forefront as we see with some of these other interest groups or voting blocks, if you will. And I think that, crypto, if we believe it to become increasingly mainstream, as it kind of already is in a lot of ways, won't just be an interest group, but it'll be an important facet of how voters think about their financial future and how candidates are considering their financial and technology futures as well.
You bring up a really good point, especially because, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the number is even higher in Australia, where 1 out of 4 Australians actually own crypto. So it's actually more of the population. I think one of the things that we've been trying to shift in the United States, and it's hard because we have such a bigger population distributed in so many states. But one of the things that's really tricky is, like, when people talk about crypto and stand with crypto, it almost does it a little bit of a disservice because people think it's just about the cryptocurrencies and they really don't understand it's about the tech, right? It's about that if this was digital music, we could be at the LimeWire Kazaa stage, and if you shut it down, we're never going to get to the Spotify or Apple Music of what digital finance looks like. Or what happens if the Spotify or Apple Music of digital finance aren't made in America? What if they're made in Dubai? What if they're made in Singapore? Like, what if they are based in countries? What if digital finance, to Katie's point earlier, moves to the places that are luring it, and the United States is no longer, right, like the place where everything's being built? And I think trying to educate more Americans about, like, the larger ramifications of digital finance and digital innovation, finding more amenable homes abroad, is something that I think I wish a lot of us had started sooner. So I know we have like 2 minutes, so we'll do like a little lightning round, and maybe just say for the last thing, what are you guys looking at in terms of the regulatory landscape? Like, what's coming up that you're looking at the most, maybe especially in the United States, but elsewhere if the United States isn't crazy enough for you? I'll tell you what, we'll go Steve first, because Steve always has things to say, and that'll give everybody else a moment to think.
If there's a Dem pivot, Amanda, everyone waits for the pivot. The pivot doesn't need to be much. Anything, any signal, any sign, any utterance, I think the conversation shifts materially.
That's a good one. Ayana, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think, I most of my career's been spent in the money laundering space. So just kind of looking at and thinking about how these regulations will impact things like the travel rule and and what people are doing right now. I'm really closely following the impact between the banks and the cryptocurrency and how they work together. So it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out in the next 18 or so months.
Okay, it's pretty spicy saying travel rule right before Lana would go. Like, those are fighting words, but
I hope I didn't steal her thunder.
Lana constantly gets upset with me and says I talk about things other than the travel rule. So Lana.
No, double spice. That's all. It's all good. For me, I would say definitely it's monitoring the impact of travel rule regulation globally. We have the travel of funds regulation, the TFR, that is applicable to all EU member states, coming online December 30th of this year. And I think that's going to have a huge implication globally, including in the US, because a lot of the US exchanges have entities in the EU or customers in the EU. So there's a lot of cross-border transactions happening. So I think it's going to have a huge impact. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
And I think we found the echo. I don't know if you can hear it, but yeah. Well, everybody else was on mute, and so we were like, I think we found it. But do me a favor, go on mute, and Katie, bring us home. What's your last thing that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I had a joke. I went on maternity leave and just came back recently, and a lot of things kind of were in the same place. But it did seem like where there had been movement and momentum was in the U.S. on the legislative front. So if that is a helpful indication of progress as I kind of measure time these days, I was really encouraged, I think, by the efforts underway in Congress. And as Steve alluded to, Leader Schumer's interest in passing bipartisan legislation on our industry by year end. We, obviously we're always optimistic and hopeful that that Congress can indeed do that, and we've seen it in other bills this session. So remain optimistic on that front.
Awesome. Well, Lana, Katie, Ayana, Steve, thank you so much for coming. And Amy Rose, I know I speak for all of us when I say thank you so much for having us and letting us be a part of this wonderful conference. I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. You're all legends. Really appreciate the time. I know it's late over where you are in the US and also across I know some of you are in other areas of the world. So really, really appreciate it. Absolute legends. Have an amazing evening.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're going to go to our next session now. The US has been absolutely leading in all facets of regulation. We do look to them, we follow them. Now we're going to go over to New Zealand, and this is an opportunity to really compare and contrast. It's going to be interesting going from the US to New Zealand, but I'll leave all of our attendees to make their judgments, I guess. So I will see you in the next session.